Actually a very classic story, or I should say case study, that was sent to a rabbi that basically had an individual who was in charge of some list of people who are going to make it out of Germany during World War II. And he had an opportunity to put his son on there. But if not his son, it would be somebody else's son. Meaning if he put his son in, somebody else's would be taken off. Maybe this is for the kinder transports or something. And so he asked the rabbi, what is the Jewish law for this? So the rabbi basically answered with two parts to his answer. One is that he has every right to put his son on there, but he also can't tell him what to do. Meaning the way he posed the question, he was obviously struggling with this fact that by me putting my son on here, there's somebody else is going to die because of that.
Right.
So the answer that the rabbi gave him was he's allowed to do whatever he wants. There would be nothing wrong with saving his son, but you have to live with that answer. You have to live with that answer. Whatever you do, you got to live with it.
He'd be guilty. He'd feel guilty.
But on Jewish law, he would be allowed to, right? We have morals, values, ethics, feelings, and we have law. So he said on the law, you can do it. But let's say you survive this war and live for another 50, 60, 70 years, you have to live with that, whatever you did.
I'm sure they do.
So in this regard, I think it said that at the end of the story, he didn't put his son on there.
Really?
That's what I remember. I could check that. I don't remember if it said what he did, but if I recall, I think it said that he didn't. But either way, I mean, the point is, the answer, I think, is what I'm getting at with you is this person who decided who should live and who should, he's not saying they're dying, but he's making sure these people get out. Right. So the question is, does his hand in saving one over another therefore affect the death of someone else? Is kind of, if I rephrased your question, and that's what this man was posing as well to the rabbi. And the answer that he gave was, you can save your child. I don't have the text in front of me. It had some probably Jewish law precedents for it. But at the same time, he said, you're going to have to live with that. So choose your answer accordingly. I cannot give you the actual what to do answer.
And if he didn't put his son on there, then he would live with the guilt.
Exactly.
Well, there's no
win.
no right.
Right. Moses was posed with this very same question as well. Moses in the Torah. So it says when the Egyptians were there were a number of things that they were doing to baby boys. One was they were drowning them, and the other one was they were putting them into the walls that they were building, and kind of like as a brick almost.
Right.
So Moses saw a kid that was being put into the wall, and he turns to God and he says, I want to save this guy. So God says, this person's going to cause you so much trouble in the future. He doesn't have a good future. His future is full of evil. So Moses said, but right now he's not. So he saved his life. So this idea is like, we don't know what somebody's going to be in the future. We have to look at them at the present, which is kind of what you're saying. It's like, who cares who has the knowledge, the sciences or whatever degrees. In the end of the day, right now, they're equals. And how can you choose one over the other? And Moses did exactly what you just said. It's like it bothered him.
A true story. My cousin who was involved with smuggling the Jews out of Syria. He smuggled 3,200 Jews out of Syria.
Is this the one I met? The daughter? Didn't I meet the daughter of that?
No. I told you about her. There was a family that she had bribed the Syrian officials for
to help
exit visas, and she was on the plane with her 3 children. And the Syrian police came on the plane and said, you have to leave one of your children behind.
Oh, it's like Sophie's Choice.
That was to make sure that they come back, or?
So she had to leave one. It so happened they were able to smuggle her out of the country later, but they didn't know it at the time.
Right.
Horrible. It's horrible.
Right. So does everyone suffer so that, or do you say, no, we'll save 3 and have 1 suffer? Right. These are the things that no one wants to have to deal with, but those are the things that come up. unfortunately. And fortunately, in our days, we don't have it here,
Yeah,
but it's still happening
Yeah,
in
yeah.
countries.
yeah.
Right. No, it's happening all around us. I meant like in America, we don't have this.
so,
Clearly, it's happening every single country that's dealing with migrants, or we're seeing it. It's just not for our families.
so far, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I heard you.
Now, I have another question. Talking about forms. And you said it was, right, I know that God is never mentioned, but you say it's like, works in mysterious ways. But I have a different take. I think Esther and Mordecai did the right thing because she spoke truth to power. She didn't have to took a chance. She happened to be in the palace, but it was a big deal to go to the king. So she used her own judgment. I mean, Mordecai told her, you have to use the R whatever, but she still did it.
Right.
So individuals sometimes have to, when you're in the right place, do the thing that you should be doing. It didn't hurt that Moses was raised in the palace and knew the workings of the palace. It didn't hurt maybe Kissinger was in the White House, maybe.
Who said he was good? Who said Kissinger was good for the Jews? I'm just saying that.
Hopefully.
But I don't think you're saying anything different than what I shared. So just to back up, I shared that on Purim, the story of Esther and the story of Mordecai, the Megillah does not mention God's name once, right? Why not? Well, first of all, if you don't want to see God, you could say it's a bunch of coincidences. It's a coincidence that Esther was the most beautiful and won the pageant. It's a coincidence that Mordecai knew all the languages and therefore overheard a plot to kill the king that was in a different language and understood it and reported it. It's a coincidence that Esther was the queen during a time that Haman wants to kill the Jews. It's a coincidence that the night that Haman wants to kill Mordecai early, the king can't sleep and is reading the royal ledger of, or someone is reading it to him, of somebody who saved the king's life but wasn't rewarded, right? So if we want, we can always say it's coincidences. On the other hand, God, of course, this is the other side of that, the way we choose to look at it. And this is why I say choose. You have to want to see God. He is clearly the hand that's connecting all the strings. And if you don't want to see it, you can just leave it as is, no God in the story. If you want to see it, you clearly see there's no, you can't have, how many coincidences do we have to have before you say there's something more than a coincidence? So even with all of that, what you're adding is that, okay, so now that we know Esther is in the palace and all the details, that doesn't mean that she's going to rise to the occasion. We get that. There is a part of Esther that has to still say, I'm doing it. But if you listen to Mordecai's real words of action and inspiration to her, it says, he says two things. Number one is, maybe this is why you became queen, just to rise to this occasion. And number two, if salvation doesn't come through you, it will come through some other method. So,
There's no historical corroboration or evidence that Purim is anything but a made-up story. I'm saying.
No, I hear you.
It's not like they found the Rosetta Stone in Egypt.
Right.
Where they translate and get the history of Egypt, but there is nothing.
I've never researched that. I could Google it quickly. I don't know. It sounds like you're saying from research that historical proof to the story of Esther.
We dressed up just like they do for carnival. They're saying it probably has some pagan roots, some different holiday. But we adapted to where we live and incorporated and use it for our own. And I say they should have cookies like Queen Esther. Why are we doing Haman?
Oh, yeah.
Well, so,
But we shouldn't forget
well, I mean, there's a lot.
cookies.
Well, so Hamantashen really started off differently. It was a Muntosh, which is mun is a poppy seed filling. It's German.
That's a-
Tosh is a pocket-filled pastry. You didn't see what was inside. The custom was to eat that because just like you didn't see God openly, you had to take a bite out of the story to see the miracle. So too were these pocket-filled pastries that you only bit into it, you actually saw and tasted the pastry, the actual filling. Today we leave them a little open so you could see, oh, I don't want that one. That one's raspberry. I want the prune one. Or today I saw for the first time a box that said pomegranate filling. I didn't even know they have such a thing.
When my father
It
made,
was from New York.
when my father and grandfather made them, they were closed. They
Absolutely.
couldn't see 'em.
Big one.
Oh, yeah, the big ones.
Big one.
Yeah.
But they put a glaze on that top so they could tell which one was which. No.
Tell,
But
tell.
they were closed. You couldn't see what was it.
These ones and the cookie ones, Tel Aviv bakery.
But the cookies came out later. And
Oh, yeah.
There were only the yeast ones.
And they only made 3 kinds.
What kind were the big ones?
Poppy seed and
Prune.
strawberry and an apple.
Really?
All right, so here's an article from the Orthodox Union. I'll just read some of the excerpts, but apparently it's a longer. Mitchell First, a local Teaneck scholar, carefully addresses the book of Esther in one of the many essays in his Esther Unmasked, a collection of scholarly investigations into Jewish history and texts. And there's a link to his essay. Our main sources of information about ancient Persia are Herodotus, a Greek writer, and Ctesias, a Persian doctor. Both refer to a Persian king named Xerxes, or however you pronounce that, who seems to be the biblical Ahasuerus. Herodotus and Ctesias both mention the wife Armestris, who was very wicked. From the book of Esther, we learn of 2 Ahasuerus' wives, the wicked Vashti and the righteous Esther.
Well, she wasn't wicked. She went out danced naked.
Vashti, it says she was very wicked. All the Medrash, it says she would treat her. No, you're talking about one part of the story. It says that she treated her maids terribly. There's a lot of, the story of Esther only brings one part. Then when you have like the Medrash on it, it talks about her, the way she acted. For our story's purpose, we don't need to know that part. We just need to know that she didn't show up when she was called. But anyways, we learn of these 2 wives. Is this a contradiction between the historical records and the biblical book? First, again, that's the professor's name. Identifies Esther with Amestris because of the similar consonants within the 2 names. Herodotus says that Amestris' father was the military commander Otannis, while the Bible says that Esther's father was Avichail. This discrepancy can be explained by Esther's suppression of her family history for her own safety. First also points out that in Hebrew, the name Avichail means military commander. Avi, the father, Chail of army, which was Otain's profession. However, he adds a more important point, one that should frame this entire discussion. All historical evidence emerges from a context. Herodotus was a Greek writing with an agenda about events he did not witness. Ctesias was a Persian with Greek leanings, but similarly wrote about events he only heard about at best. There were no professional historians back then, nor academic standards. Even today, when professionals train to follow academic standards, we still see blatant biases and politics affecting objectivity. Readers of a contemporary academic Arab text about Israel would be rightly skeptical. In ancient times, historians did not try to avoid biases and even recorded myths and rumors. Yet today we regard their writings as history. And here is the important point, which first only implies. Why do historians judge the Bible based on Greek and Persian historical records? There is a bias against the Bible, accepting other testimonies as truth with which to criticize the Bible. An objective historian would treat all the texts with equal criticism. A traditional Jew would give the Bible more credibility and use it as a measure of other texts. Faith is belief without proof, and faith against flimsy counterclaims is easy. If Herodotus' story does not match the Bible, then with all due respect to the learned scholar, he must have been mistaken for any of a variety of reasons. First points out that many ancient moderns and modern scholars have questioned Herodotus' accuracy. He even wrote explicitly that my business, quote, my business is set down that which is told me. To believe it is none at all of my business. Ctesias' reliability has also been questioned, as he was known to sensationalize stories to entertain readers. Sadly, our knowledge of the ancient world is limited. The archaeological remains give us only a limited glimpse into great civilizations, relative crumbs from thousands of years of history. The few ancient writings that remain offer us insight, but with great limitations. When evaluating Greek or Persian history, scholars are hesitant about the reliability of the available information. When approaching the Bible from a historical perspective, we must also exercise caution. The disciplines surrounding ancient history offer us many insights into human nature and history, as well as the biblical context. They are important in many ways and can sometimes inform our understanding of Torah. However, their importance is often exaggerated and their implications given more conclusive power than warranted. We can speculate from the available evidence, but not much more. Certainly, believing Jews should place more faith in our traditions than in ancient Greek writers. First, ably defends the Purim story as a reality, refocusing our view of history and the Bible. And if you want, I can keep this open and send it to anyone who wants to read it.
Okay, so the Megillah is the other side. Where did that text come from?
Jewish writers.
When?
It says Mordechai and Esther wrote down the story. It's at the end of the Megillah. It says that.
Okay.
Into this, and
Follow it, and it just came through history.
correct. So I guess part of it will be, okay, how far back do we have our first Megillah? And then, of course, you're always going to have that skeptic who says this was a parable or some sort of
When was that?
story to teach something.
Put on that?
The story of Purim in the year, I don't know, maybe 300 or 400 before the Common Era. I could check that, but it's around that. But again, there's always going to be, I think in general for the Torah, the entire Torah, there's always the ability to be that skeptic, right? We base it off of the texts. And we don't have historians that say, this is true, this is true, this is true. It's kind of what this author is writing about. But again, I only read excerpt of that. There's more in the beginning of it, and there's the actual essay of that writer. If somebody wants, I kept it open.
And that's much later. Sada there was a historian.
Correct. Well, Masada's after the
Much
Torah. Exactly. Masada is Second Temple. So we're talking about 2000, no, like the year 300 or something, or maybe, sorry, the year 70 of the
70.
Common Era,
Yeah.
70s. So we're talking about, less time. But again, it's always, there's no problem with questioning. That's what I've learned. Questions, what do you do after you question? Right? Does your question mean that you therefore ignore it all? Or is your question there to help you study and grow?
Well, my question is always, that the stories within the Torah are earlier Aesop's fables. But that doesn't change the fact that the Torah gives us moral and ethical teachings as to how we can live our life. I don't believe that Methuselah lived 900 years.
Right.
Okay. I
So
don't believe there were 2 million Jews
that left Egypt.
that left Egypt. I mean, it's just inconceivable that, first of all, if 2 million Jews left Egypt, 10 across and 10 feet between them, when the first Jews got to Israel, half of the Jews would still be in Egypt.
I don't know if that's true, but
It is.
But my point always, meaning regardless if we don't see it the same way, I'm using this example right here. The Torah's lesson in that is, that's the question. Okay, so let's say you have struggles with believing it. Is it meant to be real? Is it just a teaching? Let's say you have that struggle. Question is, what do you do afterwards? That's what I'm saying. Is that therefore the reason why you won't celebrate Pesach because it makes no sense? Or is it, no, I'm going to celebrate Pesach. I have an issue with those details. What am I gonna do about it? Nothing, right? I have my,
Your 2 million come from, is that,
because it says 600,000 adult males between the age of 20 and 60.
so it says that.
Yeah, so then if you start adding children, younger adults, older adults, women, you get a much greater number.
Probably got 2 million people,
I think they say 2.3 or 2.4.
yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, it
Doesn't make sense.
So like, that's why,
Egypt was not about 2 million people. Think that couple 100,000 might have gotten away while they're taking.
well,
care
so
of
you have to
us.
realize they didn't protest anything that night. It's only 3 days later, like, oh my goodness, what did we just do?
Well, yeah, but out of the 2 million, 3/4 of them would still be there 3 days later.
no, but
They couldn't.
Well, that's what I think, that's,
none of them lived to go to Israel.
Right.
So they.
no, that's not correct either. Of the 20 to 60-year-olds, none of them made it to Israel.
Oh.
So 19-year-old at that story, or a 61-year-old at that story could have.
Well, how long did they?
But 61 didn't live 40 years.
Well, I don't know.
But
I've seen 100-year-olds.
well, even if you just take 600,000.
I'm just saying, my point is those are already details that are less relevant.
But the story to me is just the way of transmitting.
It's an arrow. Arrow.
Moral,
So that's why I say that if let's say I believe it like you do, I'm saying, let's say I thought like you, is the Torah divine or not? Is the Torah from God?
I mean, my belief is that the Torah was written by some very wise men who realized that without some basis of behavior, there would be complete chaos, and they made up the stories. Maybe some parts were historical, but they made it up and in order to
Sensationalizing
set a
it.
standard for human behavior, so that the whole world wasn't in chaos.
So I'll just add to why I asked that question. If that's the case, that it was written by wise men without the God side to this, then anything in there can be changed. And why do I continue to press on this point? Because you said if there's lessons of morals, values, ethics, maybe those aren't relevant today. Maybe we change. So that's why it's important to understand, how do you, how does each one of us view the Torah? If it's divinely inspired, those lessons are timeless. If it is man-made, then even the value system that comes from there is relative. I'm not even talking about the mitzvot that people have issues with. So it says, don't commit adultery. I'm using one that I think we all are on the same page about. Maybe in those days that was important. Today we have polyamorous, there's so much, times have changed. Who cares if I have one or two or. So I think that you have to honestly question that on your own, not necessarily for our discussion. What is the Torah? Is it a value system that constantly changes? And what we held dear 100 years ago isn't even held dear today.
What they do for people who are dying today is completely different than what they were doing at that time.
For example, what's a Torah example you're sharing?
Keeping people alive resuscitating someone who has died, and they getting their heart started again.
Hold on, that's not on values. You're saying medical technology.
Yeah.
I'm talking about on values. Oh. The alarm's off. So in that regard, the Torah, that's the question. And that's why I asked, going back to how I posed that to you. If I believe the Torah is divine, then I can't come back 100 years later or 300 years later, or for us 3,300 years later, and start analyzing, oh, I like everything except for that line. Let me scrap that.
But we haven't done that with kosher.
No.
All the Torah says is that you shouldn't mix
You should not give
Okay.
So,
3 times.
okay, but that doesn't say that you have to wait 6 hours.
Oh, I thought you were gonna talk about other animals. You went easy on me.
No, you don't have to wait 6 hours, and why is it?
Right.
chicken meat
Okay.
not- I mean.
No, so you're correct, but hold on. But hold on, it's very important that we know what is biblical and what's rabbinic. So for me to answer this question, and it's a very good question, is, okay, on the Torah's specifics, let's talk about those before adding what the rabbis added as protections. That's how I'm going to phrase that, right? Every legislative body in the world adds protections, or in our Torah or Jewish vernacular, we say fences. They create fences around the Torah. So that's why meaning your question is still good, but I'd like to back it up. Instead of using a rabbinic prohibition, let's stick to biblical, right? Because the rabbis, they're allowed to add stuff. We agree that legislative bodies do things, whether we like them or not. I like speeding, let's say, and I don't like that they made a speed limit of 40. I'm just using that as an example. But they put it so that we save lives. You don't drive too fast on a street that's going to have people coming out from sidewalks or driveways, right? They make these laws to protect others. So looking at a biblical prohibition of, let's say, milk and meat, they created additional prohibitions to protect us from hitting the biblical prohibition. Or I could use Passover as a quick example, right? There are a lot of biblical prohibitions, and then the rabbis add stuff on them so we don't hit the biblical prohibition. Chametz is not allowed on Passover. So we do a number of things before Passover to get rid of our chametz, because you shouldn't be in your possession on Passover itself, right? So those are things that are added. And again, that's not, I don't even know if chametz was a good example for Passover, but the idea is there are a number of things that the rabbis add. So if we're going to kind of analyze the Torah itself, I don't want to mix in a rabbinic prohibition. So let's go, give me a different example if you want to tell me something.
Is it hummus the only one that is mentioned?
Chametz, rather than
That some of the other prohibitions?
of Passover?
Yeah.
Like what?
This is the only one that's.
So I'll give you a rabbinic one, for example, for Passover. I think everyone here is Ashkenaz, correct?
Right, and we didn't eat rice, but now
You do?
you can.
Who said you can?
I heard. it.
Oh.
The Sephardi.
Yeah, I'm not going to mix in on that. I'm not going to mix in on where you heard that one, but that's the example of not having rice or beans on Passover is rabbinic. Why did the rabbis do that? Because they were afraid. This is the Ashkenaz problem. The Sephardic rabbis trusted their people more. The Ashkenaz rabbis were afraid that us people were less knowledgeable and wouldn't differentiate between rice and flour. So you'll see somebody eating rice flour and not be smart enough to discern that rice flour is allowed on Passover, wheat flour is not allowed. So they created a prohibition and said no rice. The Ashkenaz rabbis. The Sephardic rabbis said, no, we're not worried about that. And guess what? Many Sephardic families eat rice. Not all do, though. I've been learning that as I meet different kind of communal groups. So let's say Moroccans might have one set of traditions in the Passover stuff. And if you're Sephardic from Algeria, you might have a different set, slightly different, but a lot of similar customs. So that's why I use that as a better example. So if we go back to the Torah part, and you don't believe it's from God, then why can't I just scratch out a line I don't like? I could. Whatever that wise man, right, because that's a kind of the reference, whoever wrote it according to that viewpoint is a person. And that person doesn't really know today's society, and things have changed and love is strong. And again, every argument that you can put in there. So I always think it's important to realize if you're looking at the Torah and you're looking at it as a life lesson book, a life of morals, ethics, values, You have to be honest with yourself at first glance. Am I looking at this that it's from God? Or am I looking at it that it's from a human being? If it's from God, then I realize they're timeless. And whatever it said then is still relevant today. The creator of the machine or the engine, like I use for the car example, is the one who knows best what is the systems that should be put in place to make it run, to get its best value, to make it do its job. So in the world, we have the same idea. God creates the world. So God also gives us the blueprint, the manual of what makes this world run properly. Do we always like it? It's not always easy. And for some of the prohibitions are much more difficult than others. Like we talked about love. That's not an easy prohibition. All the aspects of it. Again, we don't have to go so sensational with genders. We can talk about prohibited relationships even within heterosexual relationships. So again, this is the idea of like, how does this world run best? And these are the ways that you effectively do it. Now, what I always like to add to this, and I've shared this many different times in different subjects, is that let's say a person understands that, but doesn't live it, right? They're not up to those points. They don't live that lifestyle yet, or maybe never. At least they know what's right and wrong and strive to do better, rather than pretending like it's not relevant and scratching out those verses. And that's going to have a very different style of approach to other things in your life because of that, especially on a Jewish perspective. So I might think Passover is very important and know that I shouldn't be eating bread on day 2, day 3, day 4, which means that when a choice comes up on day 5, even though day 2 through 4, I did whatever I wanted, on day 5, I can still make a choice that is in line with the Torah and not feel like I'm a hypocrite. I just wasn't doing that those days, but this is still the mitzvah of the 8 days of Passover. And today I want to live that. Whereas if I don't believe in it, then what's the difference between all the days or at the Seder itself? I could have beer at the Seder. So I think it kind of changes how we view, this is my personal opinion, that when I believe it as godly and it's truly from God, it will change how I engage each opportunity, right? Maybe yesterday I didn't do it the right way, quote unquote. Today I want to do it the right way. And today I'm doing a mitzvah. And it's a beautiful thing. And I'm connecting to God. So it will I think it will enhance our Judaism when we look at it that way. If we look at it that it's just some man, then the meaning is a little bit less, at least. Again, this is my personal perspective on this whole thing based off of Jewish teachings, but that's how I view it. You'll have a much more meaningful Judaism when you believe it's from God and understand that maybe today I'm not holding that in my life, in my actions, but it doesn't detract from the times I do things. It just enhances the times I do things.
One mitzvah goes to another.
Correct.
But what if it was written by man, but inspired by God? In other words, Moses wrote it, but God told him what to write.
So then it's God's Torah.
But they have gone through the language analysis of there were probably 3 authors.
Before.
So I'll tell you something interesting. I'm not to answer that specifically, because I know that that's something you can read so many scholarly pieces on. The question that really comes up for most people is who wrote the last verses of the Torah. It says Moses dies.
I was just saying that.
Right? If we say that the entire Torah was written by Moses, that's the Jewish opinion. Then who wrote the last ones? It says Moses died. And that's its own Jewish questions. Was it Moses? Did it fill in by itself? Did Joshua finish it? But again, regardless of how you phrase it, of who penned it, is it God's or not, is the question. And the Jewish opinion is this is written by God. Interesting to kind of use that last essay that we were reading. It was like, okay, you can always have history kind of try to prove it, the historical authors, but why do we give them more credence than the Bible? And if you're of faith, you have to at least acknowledge that you're always going to choose the Bible's, at least I'm talking for myself, veracity over a historian. But I also understand the questions. Your questions are real questions. You're not the only one who asks those questions, right? It's endless time has asked these questions.
Question is, there are some numerous things that are, I'm an accountant by trade, so things have to be
Right.
black and white.
I get it.
There's numerous things that are just impossible to believe in the Torah.
For example,
Methuselah living.
oh, you're saying you're going back to the first one.
Yeah, going back to the Exodus. Sarah giving birth at 100 years old. And many others that all the Jews were in Egypt for 400 years. Well, in that 400 years, that part of the world, and they know this historically, was very nomadic. And the fact, and with all the history that they had found, and the Egyptian history is the most documented ancient history anywhere. There is not one mention of Hebrews, of slaves,
And no artifacts.
or plagues, or.
Well, that we brought up already. How come, did anyone watch it? You watched it, but did anyone else watch it? Exodus. No one else watched it? Okay, we need to get some, we need to get a screening.
I watch it, it is fascinating.
Watching what?
It's,
It was called Exodus.
I think it was last year or 2 years ago.
No, it's an older, I'll tell you what it was. We had talked about it. Exodus documentary. Patterns of evidence. Patterns of evidence, Exodus.
Exodus, yeah.
So
Evidence.
Patterns of evidence.
evidence.
Yeah. So again, but I also, you're not the first person to ask these questions. Like I told you, there's a guy in our shoal who even just going to the 7 days of creation, he has issues with.
But he's still going to your show. They're still doing it.
Yeah, it for him, he found some answer that works for him. I have an answer that works for me. It's fine.
It's your interpretation.
It's not, I mean, what bothers him doesn't bother me. So I have a different answer, right? He says 7 days of creation was not 24 hours, or the idea of 24 hours didn't happen yet. So a day could have been 1,000,000 years.
Right.
I don't need that answer. I have a different answer. But I'm just using that. For me, I could say that the world was created. I share this a lot here. The world was created mature. When God put a tree into the world, it was already whatever date God gave the tree then.
Believe the story of no two of every
Animal.
on it.
Listen, that's why I'm saying there is a leap of faith within religion, right? I think everyone understands that.
I mean, in some things, there's also, it comes from one idea.
Also, if you believe that it was written by a person, you need that, right? It's like we sensationalized a tiny story is kind of what we'll say about the Torah. So meaning I don't argue with those points because there's going to be endless amounts of answers and more questions. That's the truth each time. The question is, what do you do with your questions? Right? Are they there to make you not believe? Are we going to be the wicked son in the story of Passover who wants nothing to do with it and therefore asks the questions to get out of the Seder? Or are we going to be the wise son who asks the question as the wicked son, but wants an answer? He wants to learn and grow. And so it's really up to each one of us to see how and from where are we coming with these questions. But there's nothing wrong with the question. We're taught to ask. So what we don't know today, maybe there will be some more understanding tomorrow, maybe not. But that's important to kind of always remember when we do ask these questions, which are 100% allowed in Judaism. This does not make you a lesser Jew because you struggle with something in the Torah. That's a fact. So I always think that's important. Like, I never get fazed by questions. I don't have all the answers. I mean, you have good questions. But the question is, if I have those questions, if they bothered me, what am I going to do with that? Is it going to make me stop being of Jewish practice and custom?
No.
Or is it just going to make me want to learn more?
So that's why we're all here.
So that's why, for me, those questions are good questions. Did he live 1,000 years? You know, like I said, what bothers one person might not bother the other. In those days, for whatever reason, because even in the Torah, you see the age start getting less and less till you get to like Moses when it's 120. So if they lived 1,000 years in the beginning, to me, it doesn't bother. Times have changed. Were there dinosaurs? If there were, why can't we believe that people lived 1,000 years? My point is, over time. Did dinosaurs live 1,000,000 years ago? That's a different question. You know, like if we're going to start using dates that science gives, you're going to have another bunch of questions that Judaism asks, or at least I ask. That's where those things start getting to me. Okay, the Grand Canyon is 15 or 25 million years old. And again, I already have my answer that I'm comfortable with. But when I was younger, it's like, wait, we're only in the year 5783. How could the Grand Canyon be 25 million years? So again, those are, each one of us kind of finds the solutions that work for them, or no solution, and we keep learning. Science changes, right? As we keep growing and learning. I mean, if there was ever a living science to watch, it was COVID, right? To see how, as you studied, you learned more, debunked something from before, added something else to the equation. I think for people who wanted to learn, COVID was the greatest living lesson. There are plenty of living lessons, but this was like to the world.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It's interesting. I was at a tour of the Bio Design Center at ASU. ASU has become one of the top research universities. And Stanford has a electron accelerator,
Pretty cool.
2.2 miles long, where they glide electrons from. ASU just built one
Oh, wow. Where is it?
here.
In Tempe?
Yeah. It's 33 feet long, does the same thing that the one at Stanford that's 2.2 miles long.
Yeah, because the
That's pretty
magnets
amazing.
they put around
Yeah.
cause the acceleration.
Because, yeah, we've got more technology.
To create that same force within the smaller, that's pretty amazing. It's the size of this room, pretty much.
In the Torah, there are things we don't do now. We don't have a temple, we don't do sacrifices, we don't have a red heifer.
Right.
Certain things that we don't do. And my question here is, why is it that in every generation or so, there's someone that just wants to get rid of the story in Purim, in England, they get it, even Ulysses Grant wanted to get rid of the Jews in America. Why is it?
If we were the money man.
That was
Well, that might have been an answer in one generation.
right.
The short answer is how God created us. It says, this is in the, I think the word they use is, it's a halacha, it's a law. Esav hates Jacob. God wrote it in the Torah, he hates us. There's always going to be somebody who hates us. And that's kind of the text in the Haggadah. It says in every single generation.
People vanished off the face of the earth.
Right.
So why?
Because God wants us here.
Thank you.
What I'll end off with is something that kind of ties into kind of what we talked about is, so let's say Jewish wise, we want to do more than before. That's how I kind of phrase it. It's like, today I could decide I want to do something right, and tomorrow maybe I'm not going to do it as well. It's just how we live our lives. But when we do it, how do we make it meaningful and to the best of our ability? So Pesach and Passover Seders are one of the most celebrated gatherings in Jewish families. But many of us do it earlier than evening, right? You start at 5, you might be over by 7:30. So I actually brought in a text, and I can email these afterwards to anyone who's hosting a Seder. What can you do at your Seder to make it fulfill the mitzvot of the holiday, but not overtax your family who never experienced that in their Seder? Exactly. I gave it last time.
I saved
You
it.
saved it? I brought it just to.
Yeah.
So what I share is always the same thing. There are a number of mitzvot in the Seder. There are, which means biblical commandments. There are a number of rabbinic traditions, or I should say rabbinic laws, and there are a number of customs. If you want to fulfill the Seder to its perfection, you're going to follow the entire Haggadah, which will take you 30 to 45 minutes of readings and some more probably.
Well, it depends if you have the Maxwell House.
Well, the text is always the same. It's how fast you read it, if your family will sit through it, if you have kids that you're going to kind of tweak it, everyone does their own thing. So how do you do it that you're making sure you're getting the best out of that powerful time? So one of the things I'll always share is, regardless of what I'm about to share, if you're starting your Seder at 5 p.m. or 5:30 and you're finished by 7, the Seder in Phoenix this year should start after 7:17. Why? Because that's nightfall. That's Passover. So we celebrate it at the time that we left. So what I always share is have matzah for dessert, right? Not just the afikomen dessert, but at the end, after 7:17, give out some matzah. Say, hey, have a bite now. Easy, done, finished. Let's say you're ready to do a little bit more during the Seder itself. What readings can I do? I don't want to do the whole thing. I know somebody till today that uses their kindergarten Haggadah for their Seder, because that's the one that they found meaningful for the kids. And obviously you and I know that that's clearly not going to have the same texts that a regular Haggadah has. So what text can I do at a minimum that will make me fulfill the mitzvot of the Seder text? Why do I have to read any text? The answer, no, that's long. I'm telling you even shorter than that. Because that's still the entire Haggadah.
You know how long that's been going on? I remember as a kid.
Of course, the new one's different. You know that? The new one has new translations. They did contemporary.
It was 2 o'clock in the morning.
As a child, you didn't get up from that table.
Well, I'm going to share what are the texts that are required. I know, again, like I said, the Kiddush,
Yeah.
the questions.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a text before that, which is, this is the bread of affliction that our forefathers, the Manishtana, Avadim Hayinu, which is the paragraph, we were slaves in Egypt and God took us out. And then literally like 3 other texts.
What
One of them is talking about Lavan, the uncle of Jacob. Says Lavan the Aramean wanted to do to our father Jacob. Should I read the whole text?
I never heard that.
Pharaoh had issued a decree against the male children only, but Laban wanted to uproot everyone, as it is said, quote, the Aramean wished to destroy my father. And he went down to Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and he became there a nation great and mighty and numerous. That paragraph. And then you have the last paragraphs are the ones that talk about the 3 mitzvot of Passover. The Passover sacrifice, the matzah, and the maror. 3 paragraphs, and you have fulfilled the obligation of the readings to talk about the Exodus of Egypt, because that is a verse. Right? So the Haggadah is long, but the actual mitzvot of Passover speak about the Exodus. Kiddush is biblical because it says you sanctify the holiday. The 4 questions says here your children should ask, right? So you have the 4 questions. So the actual readings are not a crazy amount. Like I will tell you, the Seder that we host now, which we started last year, we don't do the entire Haggadah. We do select readings. We'll have these plus a few more like Dayenu and some of the ones that people are expecting. But because we want to make sure people are getting the mitzvot.
You do the Hishne on the Hishne.
I added that one too, even though it's not
Because
one of these.
I come back, the Seder's I go to aren't anything like what I remember, and
If you leave that song, they skip it.
A waterfall.
So what we try to do is make sure that the most important things are, and I tell people, you know, the Haggadah's on your table, you're getting a full set. You're welcome to read it on your own. We're doing selections to make sure we all fulfill the mitzvah. Because again, one of the biggest things, like you, I don't know who mentioned this, wasn't mentioned here though. It was like, oh, you mentioned, you end the Seder at 2 a.m. It's like most people are not going to come back to the Seder the next year if you do that. Right? It's like, who wants to go?
You do share
And
Hamalot?
so,
I'll do everything you want.
Well, I want, Shalom and I want to do share Hamalot.
Shir Amala, that's for benching though. I'll make sure. I'll make sure. But we'll make sure he could. We'll make sure he could get in on that.
and people were, they want to sit there and wait camp until the meal is served.
Right. I always share this story. I always share a story.
Now,
Are you hosting in Chicago this year?
no,
You'll be here?
my daughter's. doing it.
Nice.
Yes.
I have different handouts. Like this is literally the same text I just shared. But this one has like 15 steps in squares. You know, it's like easy. And obviously this is a larger paper. This is now a booklet. You don't need it as a single sheet. But the point is, if you're hosting a Seder, it doesn't have to feel so religious. And you could still you can still check the mitzvah boxes. Of course, they could feel, you could add, but you have to talk to who you are. If you go from 0 to 180 in one night, first of all, your kids are going to think you snapped. And second of all, the questions, are you ready to do that? Will you burn out and therefore not finish it or not do it the next year?
We changed the Haggadah.
You do your own at home, right? You host it.
What, and
Okay. But you lead it? But you lead the Seder? Who leads it?
My son-in-law.
Okay.
Terms.
But we have 50 people.
It's a big Seder.
And we've changed the Haggadah when the kids were younger.
Yeah.
We did a different Haggadah
Right.
than we do
Right.
when they get older.
Right. So it's funny that you use that example. I always there's someone who described to me how his Seder is. And I'm like, you know, that's so beautiful when you have kids that are from 2 years old to 15-year-old, maybe to 10. But how do you engage them when they're 15? They don't want to see you jumping out in costumes anymore. That's how this guy does it. So, you know, it's important to always be meaningful. How do you make it meaningful for older teenagers or for younger adults? It's not easy.
No.
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 So that's why, like I say, when you focus on the most important thing, and I'm talking about people who don't traditionally do the entire Seder, right? They know the little Seder that you just referred to.
Things that we do is they have place cards for everybody at the table. And you write down the date and the year that you were at the Seder.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So it has like a long, it's like the Stanley Cup. It's got all the, you have to add papers to these things to make it.
And part of it is the tradition of being.
I like that.
I'll tell you, an concern had nothing to do with Pesach. I have twin grandsons who are now 20. Their birthday and my birthday are 3 days apart. When they were 5 years old, I said, we need to celebrate our birthday together. There's the three of us and nobody else was invited. We went to a spring training baseball game when they were 5. This past Sunday, we were at a spring training
So-
baseball game,
Wow.
16 years
In a row, wow.
later. And the only time we missed was the 2 years.
COVID,
We have never missed it. And one of them flew in from college.
just to be at the,
So because the other one is at a different college, so we could find the
Nice.
day where we could go to the ball game.
that's really nice.
So that.
So you're saying you've added a meaning by just saying, look, you've come tradition.
This is everybody comes and there's some outcome are away. College.
Right.
or
I could tell you something else that people are starting to do.
Even if they're away in college,
Where do they start?
they,
they still come in and it shows importance.
Or we have a
Zoom
You live stream now?
live stream, so
Right.
that everybody
is still
feels
part of it.
Still part of it.
So I'll tell you something I've seen more recently, and that is, let's say you have 50 people. I don't know if you'll get 50 of these out because it'll be forever. But you have kind of conversation starters related to Passover, related to the Seder, related to the Haggadah. So underneath each person's plate, they'll get like a card or a paper that has a question or a thought, and it kind of provides more conversation and thought-provoking ideas of what the Seder means to us. And for somebody who hasn't thought about it, they'll have to think. Or they'll hear others who have thought about it and kind of making it meaningful. This is like for an older crowd. So each kind of family does what they can to make it meaningful, that it shouldn't just be a dinner, which is what, of course, very important to get together with family, but even more a teaching moment and a way to make Passover not just a historic story, but relevant, which is what it's supposed to be. So I think that's the thing we all struggle with, how to make it, even in a family that does it every single year from, A to Z, they still want to make it relevant. They don't just want the kid to read text or the teenager to read text or the adult to read text.
Did you ever see the Haggadah? Do you have Haggadah from the IDF?
I haven't seen it.
Okay, I have it extra.
Is it in Hebrew exclusively?
No.
It's English?
No, and
Interesting.
it illustrated with the IDF.
Oh, cool.
It's
Yeah,
a
I've never
thick
seen it.
book.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Wait, what is the difference in that Haggadah?
it was published. It's a regular Haggadah, but published by the Israel Defense Force, Friends of the IDF.
I see.
And one time I gave money, and one of the choices, well, would you like a Haggadah? And it is quite a Haggadah. Then I went and bought 4 or 6 more, I don't know, and we used them for
For your own Seder, that's really cool.
you don't redo the whole thing. But the pictures, the illustrations are all IDF.
So that's what you use?
What?
That's what you use now?
A neat thing.
We stopped using that and we went to a different one, but still.
But at one point she compiled her own.
Yeah.
Wow, a lot of work. Unless it looks like this, then it might not be so much work. Fit it on one sheet?
Oh, no, we have a picture.
I was joking with you.
I mean, it's a bound book.
That's really
We
cool.
don't use it now, but we still have it.
That is pretty cool. So she binded it too.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think if there's to just connect it all together, it's the of everything that we spoke about is really that every single time we do something Jewish, it's to make meaning out of it. Right? It's not about how much we do, it's about quality. Each time, make it meaningful, own it. The quantity will grow as you find meaning. Because then it's not tedious or burdensome or long. But if you don't find meaning, we do it because we had to, and it's not the same.
Then it's worthless.
I'm not going to say it's worthless because actions in Judaism, actions without intent are still actions.
Excuse me.
But it doesn't necessarily make you feel, it doesn't make you feel good about it. And it doesn't make you grow necessarily. So that's what I would